So I want you to just picture this for a second.
Okay.
It is September 2024. You are high up in the Himalayas.
Very high up.
Right. Specifically, you are traversing the central Rongbuk Glacier. And you're just navigating this totally desolate, freezing, objectively terrifying landscape of jagged ice and crumbling rock.
Oh, yeah. It's a brutal environment.
And the air is so dangerously thin up there that every single step feels like you were breathing through a straw. So there's this documentary team, and they're carefully picking their way through this maze of deep crevasses.
Right.
And then one of the filmmakers spots something just kind of emerging from the melting ice.
Yeah.
It's a boot, just this old leather mountaineering boot that's studded with these heavy steel hobnails.
Yeah.
So get closer, right? And inside that boot is a foot wearing a wool sock.
It's just wild.
And stitched into that sock, faded but still clear as day, is this red name tape. And it reads, A.C. Irvine.
It is, it's the kind of visceral image that just immediately sends a chill down your spine. I mean, regardless of whether you are a seasoned mountaineer or someone who has literally never set foot on a glacier.
Seriously.
Because for exactly 100 years, the disappearance of George Mallory and Andrew Sandy Irvine has been, well, it's the ultimate mountaineering cold case.
The holy grail of cold cases.
Exactly. And finding that boot a century later, it doesn't just blow the dust off the mystery, it fundamentally reignites the absolute greatest debate in the history of exploration.
Which is exactly why we are here. So welcome to today's deep dive. We have a massive stack of sources on the table for you today. I mean, we're talking recently unsealed expedition diaries.
The 1920s meteorological models.
Yes, those plus modern high-altitude physiological studies, glaciology reports, forensic autopsies, all of it.
It's a lot of material.
It really is.
Yeah.
And our mission today is to synthesize all of this to just completely unpack the 1924 British Mount Everest expedition.
Yeah, we really want to get into the details of it.
We are going to explore the deeply contradictory life of George Mallory, dissect the immense, almost incomprehensible logistics of this whole undertaking.
Right, the sheer scale of it.
And we're going to confront the enduring mystery head on. Like, did Mallory and Irvine actually reach the summit of Mount Everest 29 years before Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay?
Well, to even begin answering that, we have to pull back a bit and look at the world stage in the early 1920s.
Right, set the scene for us.
Because the context of this expedition is really everything. This was absolutely not just a group of adventurous guys who, wanted to climb a big hill for the thrill of it.
Not just a weekend hiking trip.
Not at all. The stakes were geopolitical.
Right.
We were talking about the bruised, battered national prestige of the entire British Empire.
Okay, let me just play devil's advocate for a second here.
Go for it.
The British Empire in the 1920s still covers a massive portion of the globe.
Oh, absolutely.
So why are they so obsessively fixated on this one piece of rock in the Himalayas? Like, what does Everest offer them that they don't already have?
In a word, redemption.
Redemption from what?
Well, you have to look at the preceding 2 decades of polar exploration. Britain had staked just this enormous amount of national pride on being the first to reach the North and South Poles.
Oh, right. And that didn't go well.
They failed spectacularly on both fronts. The American, Robert Peary, he claimed the North Pole in 1909.
Right.
And then in just a devastating blow to the British psyche, the Norwegian Roald Amundsen beat Captain Robert Falcon Scott to the South Pole in 1911.
And Scott's story is just so dark.
It is. Scott and his entire team died on the ice during their return journey. And that tragedy just cast this long, dark shadow over British exploration.
So they are essentially 0 for 2 on the great geographical prizes of the era.
Precisely. So Everest was immediately dubbed the third pole.
Okay, I see.
Conquering the highest point on Earth was seen as literally the only remaining way to restore that lost prestige. And, you have to layer on top of this the immense psychological trauma of the First World War.
Oh, absolutely. The human toll was unimaginable.
Exactly. An entire generation of young British men had been slaughtered in the trenches of the Somme and Passchendaele. The nation was just steeped in grief and rationing.
Right, they needed a win.
Desperately. They needed a victory, some demonstration of physical and moral superiority, just to lift the national morale and prove that the British spirit wasn't completely broken.
It makes me think of the 1960s space race.
That's a really good comparison.
Right. When you look at the Apollo missions, it wasn't just about putting a man on the moon because it was cool. It was an industrial, technological, and geopolitical flex against the Soviet Union.
Exactly.
The Everest expeditions were basically the 1920s equivalent of Apollo. It was about proving exceptionalism on the world stage. But there is this geographical quirk that always trips people up.
Yeah, the approach route.
Right, because when you and I watch documentaries about Everest today, the climbers are almost always approaching from the south, right? Through Nepal.
Yeah, through the Khunbu icefall.
Exactly. But in 1924, this British team is targeting Everest from the north, through Tibet. Why make it harder on themselves by taking that northern route?
Well, it wasn't a choice, actually. It was an absolute geopolitical necessity.
Really?
Yeah. The southern side of the mountain, the route through Nepal that Hillary and Tenzing eventually took in 1953, it was completely closed off.
Oh, Nepal was closed.
Completely. The Kingdom of Nepal was fiercely isolationist at the time. It was literally considered a forbidden country to Westerners.
Right.
The British just could not secure diplomatic entry, period. So they had to look north to Tibet. But, Tibet wasn't exactly throwing its doors open either.
Right. So getting to the starting line required, like, a masterclass in international diplomacy.
Oh, a massive one.
The sources outline how the British Indian government had to engage in years of these delicate, really persistent negotiations with the Dalai Lama's regime just to get permission to map the approach.
Let alone climb the actual mountain.
Exactly. They had to leverage all these trade agreements and geopolitical security guarantees against expanding Russian and Chinese influence in the region just to get a piece of paper saying they could walk to the base of the mountain.
And that permission was incredibly fragile. I mean, it could be revoked at any moment. But, before we get into the really grueling logistics of moving an expedition through that kind of terrain, we need to understand the human element.
The man of the hour.
Specifically George Mallory. Because if you want to understand why two men would push themselves into the death zone, you have to understand the psychological makeup of the man leading the charge.
And Mallory is just a walking contradiction.
He really is.
I mean, if you close your eyes right now and picture a 1920s explorer, you probably expect this rugged, grizzled, hyper-masculine outdoorsman just barking orders.
Like a Victorian military commander.
Yes. But Mallory was this elite, Cambridge-educated intellectual. He challenges every single stereotype we have of the early pioneers.
His background is truly fascinating. He was born in 1886 in Cheshire, England, and he was the son of a clergyman.
Right.
But the physical agility, the sheer vertical instinct, it showed up incredibly early. He wasn't just an active child, he was intensely drawn to altitude.
He was a climber from day one.
Literally. By the age of 7, he was found climbing the roof of his father's church.
Oh my God.
Yeah. His sister wrote memoirs recalling how he scaled absolutely everything. Drain pipes, treacherous stone walls, the tallest trees. He just had this natural, almost preternatural sense of balance and grip.
And that agility only compounded as he grew, right? Like when he attends boarding school at Winchester College, he's not just out there playing cricket.
No, not that.
He is a champion gymnast.
Our sources note he was the only student in the entire school who could execute a giant swing on the horizontal bar.
Which is incredibly difficult. It requires immense core strength, perfect timing, and just total fearlessness. Plus, he was a competitive sharpshooter. So he's developing this really profound physical discipline.
Right. And it was at Winchester that a mathematics teacher named R.L.G. Irving actually noticed him.
Okay, who was Irving?
Irving was sort of a maverick within the esteemed Alpine Club, and he immediately recognized Mallory's raw physical potential. So he recruited him for a climbing excursion to the Alps in 1904.
Wow, straight to the Alps.
Yeah, that was Mallory's real introduction to high-altitude mountaineering. He was learning the ropes on mountains like Mont Blanc, and he just took to the ice and rock like he was born to it.
That's incredible.
But as you pointed out, the physical prowess is really only half the story here.
Right, because this is where his life story pivots into something that reads like a novel.
Yeah.
In 1905, he goes to Magdalen College, Cambridge, on a history scholarship.
Yep.
And he doesn't just fall in with the athletic crowd. I mean, he is rowing, yes, but he is also acting in the Marlowe Society's production of Dr. Faustus.
He was very theatrical.
And he is running with this avant-garde crowd of thinkers, artists, and writers who would later become famous as the Bloomsbury Group.
The Bloomsbury Group, that's a major connection.
Huge. We are talking about heavyweights like the economist John Maynard Keynes and the biographer Lytton Strachey. And they were just completely mesmerized by Mallory.
Oh, they were obsessed with him.
I actually want to read this excerpt from a letter Lytton Strachey wrote to a friend after meeting him because it just paints such a vivid picture of how they viewed him.
Please do. It's a vital piece of the puzzle to understand his aura.
Okay, so Strachey writes, Mon Dieu, George Mallory. He's 6 foot high, with the body of an athlete by Praxiteles, and a oh, incredible! The mystery of Botticelli, the refinement and delicacy of a Chinese print, the youth and piquancy of an unimaginable English boy.
It is just a stunning, almost swooning description, isn't it?
It really is.
But it highlights how deeply embedded Mallory was in this highly artistic, philosophically driven world. And he wasn't just a pretty face for them to admire either.
Right, he had the brains to match.
Exactly. He wrote this brilliant, award-winning essay on James Boswell. He was constantly traveling to France just to improve his French and attend philosophy lectures at the Sorbonne. He really viewed the entire world through this deeply romantic, literary lens.
See, I have to push back here because the contrast is almost jarring for me.
How so?
Well, we have this guy who ultimately wants to go freeze on a glacier in Tibet, right? But his current resume includes writing essays on 18th century biographers and hanging out with avant-garde painters in Paris.
Right.
How does a guy who sounds way more like a poet survive the absolute brutality of early mountaineering? It just feels like those two halves of his personality should be at war with each other.
It's a great point, but actually, in Mallory's mind, those two halves were perfectly synthesized. He didn't view mountaineering as a purely athletic endeavor or even as a conquest of nature.
What was it to him then?
He viewed it as an aesthetic, almost spiritual experience. To him, climbing was the physical manifestation of the exact romantic ideals he discussed at Cambridge.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, pushing the human body to its absolute limit against an immovable, majestic force like a mountain was, to Mallory, a form of high art. It was literally poetry in motion for him.
So it's not man conquering mountain at all. It's man exploring the absolute limits of his own soul through the medium of the mountain.
Beautifully put.
That completely reframes his famous answer, when a reporter asked him why he wanted to climb Everest, and he snapped back, because it's there.
Exactly.
I always thought that was just a flippant remark, but it's really an existential statement.
It is, or rather, to put it more precisely, it reflects a deep philosophical frustration with constantly having to justify the intrinsic value of exploration.
Like if you have to ask, you wouldn't understand.
Right. And this unconventional, idealistic streak carried right into his professional life, too. After Cambridge, he became a teacher at Charterhouse School. But he completely rejected the rigid, authoritarian Victorian model of education.
Yeah, the sources mentioned he looked so incredibly young that parents visiting the school would regularly mistake him for one of the students.
Which didn't help his authority with the older teachers.
I bet. And instead of ruling with an iron fist, he basically just threw the traditional curriculum out the window.
He did.
He encouraged his students to read modern literature. He asked them to write essays, challenging concepts like hypocrisy and authority, and he held these open, friendly debates about politics and art.
The older traditional faculty members were completely appalled. They thought he was eroding discipline.
Naturally.
But the students, they were deeply impacted by him. One of his students was Robert Graves, who would go on to survive the trenches of World War I and become one of Britain's most famous poets and novelists.
Oh, Robert Graves, of course.
Yeah. Graves later wrote that Mallory was his first genuine friend and the single greatest influence on his early life. Mallory basically taught him how to think independently.
But during this time, Mallory wasn't just teaching. I mean, whenever he had a break, he was pushing the boundaries of British rock climbing. He was taking trips to the Alps, to the Scottish Highlands, and to the crags of Wales. And we need to be clear for you listening. This wasn't hiking. This was highly technical, unprotected rock climbing.
This is a foundational point that we will definitely return to when we analyze the mystery of his final climb, because the general public often assumes early 20th century climbers were basically just really strong walkers.
Right, guys with walking sticks.
Right, but not Mallory. He was pioneering routes that required immense technical skill.
There's an anecdote that perfectly captures this, and I just love it. So he is climbing the east buttress of Lead in Wales.
It's a classic story.
He is on this route, and he realizes he has accidentally left his tobacco pipe sitting on a ledge further down, a spot called Bowling Green.
Right.
So instead of just leaving it like a normal person, he decides to climb back up to retrieve it. But in the process of solo climbing this sheer face just to fetch a pipe, he accidentally pioneers an entirely new, incredibly difficult route.
Entirely by accident.
Yes. And today, that route is officially recognized and named Mallory's Slab.
And, the translation of those historical routes into modern climbing grades is where the real data lies for us. Modern climbers, using the Yosemite decimal system, have evaluated the routes Mallory pioneered in Wales, places like Mallory's Ridge on Wygarn,
Okay.
and they grade these routes anywhere from 5.8 to 5.0 OA.
Let's contextualize that for the listener. What does a 5.9 or 5.10 OA actually feel like to climb?
Well, 5.9 requires you to find tenuous, almost invisible grips on a near vertical rock face.
Yeah.
You are balancing your entire body weight on the very edges of your boots, using friction and highly specialized movement to ascend.
So you can't just pull yourself up like a ladder.
Not at all. It requires immense finger strength and balance. It is definitely not something a novice can just muscle their way through. It requires technical mastery.
Wow.
The fact that Mallory was completing these grades in the 1910s without modern sticky rubber climbing shoes or any modern safety gear is just staggering.
So he was legitimately elite.
Yes. And this proven technical prowess is the absolute crux of the argument later, when we debate whether he could have physically overcome the formidable second step on Mount Everest.
But all of this momentum, the climbing, the teaching, the philosophy, it just slams into a brick wall in 1914.
World War I.
Right. He marries his wife, Ruth Turner, mere days before Britain enters the war. And then he is deployed to the Western Front in France.
The psychological impact of the war on him just cannot be overstated. Mallory served as a lieutenant in the Royal Garrison Artillery.
That's a brutal assignment.
It really was. His job was to operate in forward observation posts, essentially sitting out in the mud and blood, directing artillery fire during the Battle of the Somme.
The casualty numbers there are just horrific.
He witnessed carnage on a scale that is difficult for us to even comprehend today. He saw his friends, his entire generation, just pulverized in the trenches.
How does that alter his mindset toward Everest? Because, if you survive the Somme, your baseline for what constitutes dangerous has to be completely shattered, right?
Yeah. It profoundly altered his risk calculus. When you have lived for months under constant artillery barrages where death is entirely random and meaningless, the prospect of dying on a pristine, silent mountain just doesn't seem quite so terrifying anymore.
That makes total sense.
In fact, many historians argue that Everest became a purifying quest for these men. After the mechanized, filthy slaughter of the war, testing your body against the pure, clean elements of nature felt like a noble, almost cleansing endeavor. It really hardened his resolve.
So we have established the man, this battle-hardened, technically gifted, deeply philosophical intellectual who's carrying the weight of British prestige on his shoulders.
That's Mallory.
Let's fast forward to the expeditions. So 1924 is actually the third British attempt. They did a reconnaissance mission in 1921 just to physically find the mountain and map a route.
Right, just seeing if it was even possible.
Then in 1922, they made their first real climbing attempts, which ended in a horrific avalanche that killed 7 Sherpa porters.
A terrible tragedy.
And now, it is 1924. They know the route, they know the dangers, and the pressure is completely on. Let's dig into the massive, almost impossible logistical nightmare of just getting the expedition to the base of the mountain.
The scale of the approach march is staggering. Because Nepal was closed, they had to start in Darjeeling, India.
Okay.
From there, they traveled north through the princely state of Sikkim, climbing over snow-choked mountain passes that were over 14,000 feet high, just to enter the arid, high-altitude plateau of Tibet.
Just to get into the country.
Exactly. They then had to march for weeks through the Irvine River Valley, finally winding their way to the Rongbuk Glacier.
We are talking about a military-scale supply chain here. They had to move tons of supplies, tents, food, heavy oxygen cylinders, scientific equipment.
Oh yeah, it was massive.
And they did it using this sprawling caravan of horses, donkeys, yaks, and dozens of local Tibetan and Sherpa porters. And they're doing all of this under a massive, unforgiving ticking clock.
Because the weather dictates absolutely everything in the Himalayas. They arrived at the Rongbuk Monastery, near the base of the mountain, in late April.
Right.
And they knew absolutely that they only had until early to mid-June before the summer monsoon arrived.
And the monsoon is game over?
Completely. The monsoon pushes massive weather systems up from the Bay of Bengal, dumping feet of snow on the upper slopes of Everest and making any climbing completely suicidal. So they have roughly 6 to 8 weeks.
In that tiny window, they have to acclimatize to the extreme altitude, establish a complex chain of supply camps higher and higher up the glacier and the mountain face, and execute their summit attempts.
It's a logistical pressure cooker.
It really is. And within that pressure cooker, we see a really significant historical shift happening regarding the local porters.
The 1924 expedition really represents a pivot point in the history of Himalayan mountaineering.
How so?
Well, in the 1921 and 1922 expeditions, There was a very rigid colonial Sahib-Porter dynamic. The British climbers were the gentlemen, and the local Sherpa and Tibetan men were viewed strictly as laborers, hired merely to haul heavy loads to the lower camps.
Just carry the bags.
Right. But the British were learning the hard way that the local physiology was vastly superior at altitude.
They realized these guys aren't just strong, they're practically built for the death zone.
Precisely. So in 1924, the expedition leadership recognized that these men were capable of reaching incredible heights and were quickly absorbing advanced mountaineering skills.
Okay, so what did they change?
They took 15 of the strongest, most resilient porters and designated them as a special high-altitude team dubbed the Tigers.
The Tigers, I love that.
Yeah, they were issued better gear and were relied upon to establish the highest, most dangerous camps above the North Cols. This was the nascent seed of the transition.
From laborers to actual climbing partners.
Exactly. It began the shift from a pure labor dynamic to the modern professional-client relationship we see today, a trajectory that ultimately led to Tenzing Norgay standing on the summit as a full equal partner.
That is a massive cultural evolution happening in real time on the ice. But now let's talk about the most debated piece of technology on the mountain. The bottled oxygen.
Oh, the oxygen debate.
Because this isn't just a technical detail, it's an absolute philosophical battleground for the British.
It really was. Bottled oxygen had been introduced in 1922, primarily championed by an Australian chemist named George Finch, but the British climbing establishment completely despised it.
Why?
There was a pervasive sentiment that using English air to climb a mountain was unsporting. It was viewed as cheating, essentially lowering the mountain to the climber rather than elevating the climber to the mountain.
I want the listener to really visualize this equipment, because when we say bottled oxygen, you might picture the sleek, lightweight carbon fiber tanks modern climbers use.
Not even close.
The 1920s gear was a total nightmare. We're talking about carrying a primitive, incredibly heavy industrial apparatus on your back.
It was essentially plumbing gear.
Right. They had this steel frame holding 4 heavy steel cylinders. It had a web of rubber hoses, brass valves, and a rubber mouthpiece you had to physically bite down on to inhale.
Just to get a breath.
And the whole rig weighed over 30 pounds. Imagine strapping a heavy scuba tank to your back and trying to climb a never-ending flight of icy stairs, all while wearing hobnail boots and a tweed jacket.
And beyond the sheer weight of it, the mechanics were deeply flawed. The valves froze, the glass flow meter shattered, the rubber hoses became brittle and literally snapped in the sub-zero temperatures.
So it was heavy and it didn't even work half the time.
It was highly unreliable. Mallory himself initially hated the idea of using it. He shared that romantic notion that the mountain should be climbed by pure human endurance.
Right. The poetry of the climb.
But his mindset began to shift as he witnessed the horrific physical toll the extreme altitude took on the human body.
Well, before we get into the brutal physical breakdown of the climbers, walk us through the actual route they are taking. We know they are on the north face in Tibet. What does the map look like?
Okay, so they established base camp near the Rongbuk Monastery. From there, the route follows the East Rongbuk Glacier, which is this twisting maze of ice pinnacles.
Okay.
At the head of this glacier, they hit a massive steep wall of ice that leads up to a saddle between Everest and its neighboring peak, Changxi. This saddle is called the North Col.
The North Col.
Yes. They established Camp 4 on the North Col at roughly 7,000 meters, or about 23,000 feet.
That's already higher than anywhere outside the Himalayas and the Andes, just for Camp 4.
From the North Col, the route forces them up the exposed North Ridge, which is a sweeping ramp of rock and snow that bears the full, unfiltered brunt of the jet stream winds.
Sounds awful.
The North Ridge eventually merges into the Northeast Ridge. This ridgeline leads directly toward the summit pyramid.
But the ridge is not a smooth ramp, right?
Right.
Nature placed 3 massive roadblocks in the way.
Yes, the ridge is interrupted by 3 distinct geological formations known as the steppes.
Okay, break this down.
The first step is a chaotic jumble of large boulders that require some scrambling. But the true terror of the route is the second step, located at an astonishing 8,605 meters.
Describe the second step. Like, why is it so feared?
Geologically, it is a sudden, steep stratum of rock that juts straight out of the ridge. It has a total height of about 30 meters. But the crux, the absolute nightmare of the second step, is the final 5 meters.
The head wall.
Exactly. It is a sheer, near-vertical head wall of smooth rock. In 1924, nobody knew its exact difficulty because nobody had ever been close enough to it. But staring at it through telescopes from base camp, it stood as a massive foreboding blockade.
Just this sheer cliff blocking the way to the top.
And beyond that is the third step, which is smaller but still an obstacle right before the final snow slopes to the summit.
So the chessboard is set. The lower camps are established. The Tigers have hauled the gear up to the North Col. It is late May, pushing into early June, and the monsoon is looming.
The clock is ticking.
Let's look at the first two summit attempts, because these attempts provide a terrifying masterclass in what the death zone actually does to the human body.
The death zone is the altitude above 8,000 meters, where the atmospheric pressure is roughly 1/3 of what it is at sea level.
1/3.
Yeah. The air is so thin that the human body simply cannot acclimatize. From the exact moment you cross that threshold, your cells are actively dying.
You are slowly suffocating.
Your digestive system shuts down. Your brain is starved of oxygen, which severely impairs judgment. The body actually begins consuming its own muscle tissue for energy.
Wow. So keeping that grim biological reality in mind, Attempt 1 is launched on June 1st. Mallory and Jeffrey Bruce set out from the North Col, supported by 9 of the Tiger porters.
Right.
But the moment they leave the protective ice walls of the Col and step onto the North Ridge, they are absolutely hammered by the wind.
The jet streamlines on the north face can exceed hurricane force, and it is brutally, paralyzingly cold.
I can't even imagine.
They are trying to push up to establish Camp V, but the porters are taking the brunt of it. Before they can even reach the planned site for the camp, 4 of the porters reach their absolute physical breaking point.
They just can't take it anymore.
They drop their heavy loads of gear straight onto the snow and flee back down the mountain. The next morning, 3 more refuse to go any higher.
So the logistics just collapse.
The entire chain collapses. Mallory and Bruce are forced to abort the attempt. It is a total failure.
The mountain just shrugs them off. So Attempt 1 is a bust. The very next day, June 2nd, the expedition leader, Edward Norton, and Dr. Howard Somerville launch the second attempt.
Yes.
And they make a crucial, staggering decision. They're going to try for the summit without supplemental oxygen.
It is a testament to their sheer endurance. I mean, they managed to push higher than Mallory and Bruce. They succeed in establishing Camp 6 at 8,138 meters, sheltering in this tiny, rocky niche on the mountain face.
Above the death zone line.
They spend a completely miserable night there. On the morning of June 4th, they begin their summit bid. But almost immediately, a catastrophe strikes in the form of a really simple, mundane mistake.
The spilled water bottle.
Yes. Inside the cramped tent, a water bottle is accidentally knocked over and spilled.
Which, at sea level, is just an annoyance. You grab a towel.
But at 8,100 meters, it is a complete disaster. It takes hours to melt snow over a primitive solid fuel stove just to make water.
Hours.
They have to stop and melt more snow, which delays their departure until 6:40 a.m., which is dangerously late. But far worse, they ultimately decide to proceed with only 1 single liter of water each for the entire day's climb.
Okay, I really want to break down why that is so lethal. At that altitude, without bottled oxygen, your body is desperate for air. You are hyperventilating just to take a single step.
Right, you are panting heavily.
And the air you are breathing in is not just sub-zero. It has 0% humidity. It is completely dry.
Right.
So with every exhalation, your lungs are venting precious moisture from your body into the atmosphere. You are essentially freeze-drying yourself from the inside out.
It's a horrifying thought.
1 liter of water is laughably inadequate. The dehydration they must have been suffering is almost unimaginable.
Despite the agonizing dehydration, they push on. They realize the northeast ridge is too wind-battered, so Norton alters the route. He begins traversing diagonally across the sheer north face, cutting below the ridgeline, aiming for a deep gully that leads toward the summit pyramid.
Right, the Norton Couloir.
Exactly. And moving at a glacial pace, Norton reaches a height of 8,572.8 meters.
We have to pause and just respect the sheer magnitude of that number. 8,572 meters.
It is a monumental human achievement. Norton set a confirmed world altitude record that day, climbing completely unassisted by bottled oxygen.
Incredible.
To put that in perspective, that record was not surpassed for 28 years, until a Swiss expedition in 1952. He was less than 280 vertical meters from the actual summit of Mount Everest.
But his brain, which is totally starved of oxygen, is still functioning just enough to do the math. He realizes he is moving so slowly that if he continues to the summit, he will die on the descent.
Right.
He makes the agonizing but absolutely correct decision to turn around. And the descent is where the physiological horror show truly begins.
It really is a nightmare.
Summerell, who had stopped lower down because his lungs were failing, accidentally drops his ice axe. It just clatters down the north face and vanishes into the abyss.
Which is terrifying enough.
Right. But then, as he's following Norton down, Somervell's throat completely closes up.
The medical reality of what happened to Somervell is just terrifying. The rapid intake of that freezing, completely arid air had severely damaged the mucous membranes of his respiratory tract.
That's so visceral.
The tissue literally began to freeze and slough off, creating a massive bloody blockage in his throat.
He is suffocating on his own flesh. He writes in his diary later that he literally sat down in the snow, looked around, and just accepted that he was going to die right there.
He couldn't get any air in.
He cannot draw a breath. In this absolute, desperate, primal fight for life, he wraps his arms tightly around his own chest.
Yeah.
He uses his arms to physically compress his lungs with all his remaining strength, and he forces this violent cough.
A literal life or death heave.
And it works. He disgorges the blockage. He literally coughed up the sloughed-off frozen lining of his own throat into the snow to clear his airway.
I mean, it's almost impossible to picture surviving that. And while Somervell is surviving that nightmare, Norton is walking into another one.
Oh, right, Norton.
During the night back at camp, Norton is struck by an excruciating, blinding pain in his eyes. By the morning, he has lost his vision entirely.
Explain the mechanism there for the listeners. How does the mountain blind you?
It is a condition called photochromitis, commonly known as snow blindness. At 28,000 feet, the atmosphere is incredibly thin, meaning it filters out almost none of the sun's ultraviolet radiation. That UV radiation bounces off the pristine white snow and strikes the eyes. If goggles are removed even briefly, the UV rays essentially sunburn the corneas.
Oh, wow. Sunburned eyeballs.
The corneas swell and blister. It feels like your eyes are full of crushed glass. Norton is completely blind for 60 hours. He actually has to be physically guided and eventually carried down the mountain by a relay of porters.
Okay, so I am putting myself in Mallory's boots down at Camp 4.
Okay.
The mountain has just spat out. Attempt 1. Attempt 2 has resulted in the expedition leader being carried down completely blind and the lead doctor coughing up his own throat tissue.
The physical carnage is undeniable.
What possibly possesses George Mallory to look at those broken men and say, you know what, I'm going to go up for a third time? Is it just madness? Summit fever?
It is a really complex matrix of pressures. First, there's the immense weight of the British national expectation we discussed earlier. He knows the entire public is waiting for a victory.
Right, the national pride.
Second, there's his own deep personal obsession. He is 38 years old. This is his third expedition to Everest. He knows his physical prime is fading, and he knows he will likely never, ever return to Tibet.
This is it. Do or die.
This is his absolute last chance at the prize. But practically speaking, watching Norton and Somervell fail convinced Mallory of one critical, undeniable fact. Pure human endurance is not enough.
He needs the English air.
The only way up that mountain and back down alive is to use the bottled oxygen.
So the veterans are broken. Norton is blinded in his tent. Somervell is medically incapacitated. Mallory is the only elite lead climber left standing.
It all falls on him.
He pivots his entire strategy for one last desperate push. He goes into Norton's tent, informs the blind expedition leader that he is making a third attempt, and he announces his climbing partner.
Yes.
He is taking Andrew Sandy Irvine.
This decision sent shockwaves through the expedition, and it remains one of the most debated choices in mountaineering history.
Because Irvine was a kid, basically.
Sandy Irvine was a 22-year-old university student. He was strong. Yes, he rode for Oxford. But his climbing resume was virtually non-existent.
He was a rookie.
He had never been to the Himalayas. He had never been to extreme altitude. Norton, as the official leader, harbored deep concerns about taking a novice into the death zone, but because he was incapacitated, he felt he couldn't actively forbid Mallory's decision.
I have to jump in here because from a strategic standpoint, this sounds completely insane. Mallory is banking the entire British national prestige and his own life on a 22-year-old rookie.
Right.
He is leaving experienced climbers like Noah Odell behind. Why? Was he just looking for a strong pack horse?
He was looking for a mechanic.
A mechanic.
Yes. Irvine was a brilliant natural engineer.
Yeah.
Throughout the entire agonizing march across Tibet, while the others were resting, Irvine was in his tent, covered in grease, taking apart the faulty oxygen sets. He reverse-engineered the regulators. He stripped away heavy, unnecessary metal framing. He managed to shave roughly 5 pounds off the weight of the apparatus and, much more importantly, made the temperamental valves actually function reliably.
So he made the heavy, broken gear actually work.
Exactly. Mallory had realized a grim truth. All the climbing experience in the world meant absolutely nothing if the life support system failed at 28,000 feet.
That makes perfect sense.
He was deliberately sacrificing veteran climbing experience for a master mechanic who could keep the oxygen flowing. He also genuinely liked Irvine. They had bonded on the ship over to India, and Mallory really trusted his raw physical strength.
Okay, that logic tracks even if it is a massive gamble.
Okay.
So the die is cast. On June 6th, Mallory and Irvine leave Camp 4 for the summit push.
Yes.
Noel Odell, the expedition geologist, takes a photograph of them getting ready to depart. It is this haunting image, the last close-up picture of the two of them alive.
Iconic.
They head up the ridge with their porters. That evening, the porters return to the lower camps with a handwritten note from Mallory. It reads, "There is no wind here, and things look hopeful."
The weather, for once, seemed to be cooperating with them. The next day, June 7th, Odell climbs up to Camp V to act as a support team in case they need help descending.
Right.
When Odell arrives at Camp V, he intercepts the porters who are coming down from establishing Camp 6 for Mallory and Irvine. The porters hand Odell a couple of hastily scribbled notes from Mallory.
I actually want to read the specific note to Odell, because it gives us this really raw, unfiltered glimpse into Mallory's mindset and the chaotic reality of Camp 6.
It's a fascinating document.
Mallory writes, "Dear Odell, we're awfully sorry to have left things in such a mess. Our unacooker rolled down the slope at the last moment. Be sure of getting back to Ivy tomorrow in time to evacuate before dark, as I hope to. In the tent, I must have left a compass. For the Lord's sake, rescue it. We are without. To here on 90 atmospheres for 2 days, so we'll probably go on 2 cylinders, but it's a bloody load for climbing. Perfect weather for the job. Yours ever, G. Mallory."
You can analyze that note for hours. It is completely chaotic, just bordering on frantic.
Right. They dropped their cooker.
They dropped their unacooker, which means they have lost their primary means of melting snow for water, echoing the exact crisis Norton and Somerville faced.
So they are going to be dehydrated.
And he left his compass in the lower tent, losing a critical navigational tool in a landscape that is notorious for whiteouts.
And he's complaining about the oxygen weight.
He is complaining about the bloody load of the cylinders, realizing how debilitating the weight will actually be.
And yet, amidst all those massive red flags, he ends on that soaring, optimistic note. Perfect weather for the job.
It's that romantic fatalism again.
It totally is.
Yeah.
Now, there was also a second note sent down to the expedition filmmaker, John Knoll, who was stationed lower down with a telescopic camera.
Right.
And this note contains a crucial, very revealing mistake.
Mm-hmm.
Mallory tells Knoll to look out for them cresting the skyline at 8:00 by p.m.
Mallory clearly meant 8 a.m. No one plans to crest the summit ridge of Everest at 8 p.m. in the pitch black.
That would be a suicide mission.
But that slip of the pen is highly indicative of hypoxia. Even resting at camp, the lack of oxygen is beginning to degrade his cognitive function.
He's eating away at his brain.
John Knoll, however, understood the intent. He knew exactly where to point his massive telescopic camera the next morning. But on the morning of June 8th, the mountain refused to cooperate.
Classic Everest.
Thick clouds rolled in, completely obscuring the upper mountain. Knoll saw absolutely nothing through his lens.
But Noel Odell, who was climbing further up the mountain behind them, did see something. And this single observation is the moment that basically birthed the century of legend.
The famous sighting.
It is June 8th, exactly 12:50 p.m.
Odell had left Camp V and was climbing up towards Camp 6. He was an avid geologist, and he was actually a bit distracted, chipping away at the rocks looking for fossils.
As geologists do.
Right. But at exactly 12:50 p.m., the dense mists that had covered the mountain all morning suddenly, dramatically cleared. In his diary, Odell noted that the entire summit ridge and the final pyramid of Everest were unveiled in bright sunlight.
Odell looks up, and the details of his sighting are just haunting. He describes seeing a tiny black dot moving on a small snow crest beneath a prominent rock step.
Right.
Then a second black dot emerges, moving rapidly toward the first one. He watches as the first dot approaches the rock step and then surmounts it. It breaks skyline, as he famously described it.
Yep.
And just as quickly as the clouds parted, the mists rolled back in, swallowing the ridge. That was the last time any human eyes saw George Mallory and Sandy Irvine alive.
That single fleeting sighting is the absolute crux of the entire mystery. Odell was completely certain he saw them overcome a rock step on the ridge. But the million-dollar question is, which step? The first, the second, or the third?
Let's break down why that matters so much.
It dictates their entire timeline and their proximity to the summit. Initially, when Odell returned to base camp, his description made it sound like they were at the third step, which is right at the base of the final summit pyramid.
Okay, so if they are at the third step.
If they were at the third step at 12:50 p.m., they almost certainly reached the top.
Wow.
But over the years, Odell's own story shifted, and this is where the politics of mountaineering come into play.
Right, because he faces this intense pressure from the climbing establishment back in Britain.
Exactly. When the expedition returns to London, the Alpine Club heavily scrutinizes Odell's account. Under the influence of expedition leader Edward Norton, the official history was basically modified to state they were at the second step.
And later.
Later still, modern experts analyzing the terrain argue it must have been the first step. The logic is that Odell described them surmounting the obstacle in about 5 minutes.
Okay, and the second step is huge.
The second step is a sheer 30-meter cliff. It cannot be climbed in 5 minutes. The first step, however, is a boulder scramble that matches Odell's time frame perfectly.
But regardless of which step they were actually on, there is one chilling, undeniable mathematical fact. At 12:50 p.m., they were a full 5 hours behind Mallory's planned schedule.
And 5 hours late in the death zone is quite literally a death sentence. The window for a safe return was already completely slammed shut.
The margin for error is 0.
Shortly after Odell sees them, the weather turns violent. At 2 p.m., an intense, blinding snow squall hits the upper mountain. Odell takes shelter in the tiny Camp 6 tent, hoping the climbers will emerge from the storm.
The squall passes around 4 p.m. The mountain clears. Odell steps out of the tent. He whistles. He shouts into the thin air. He scrambles further up the crags, searching the sweeping expanses of rock and snow.
And he sees nothing.
Nothing. Just the wind. He retreats down to Camp SF to alert the others. 2 days later, Odell makes an agonizing, heroic solo climb back up to Camp 6, pushing to 8,200 meters, desperately searching for any sign.
A huge risk on his part.
Still nothing. The tent is exactly as he left it.
Recognizing that they have been missing for days in sub-zero temperatures with no supplies, Odell accepts the grim reality.
Yeah.
He takes 6 sleeping blankets from the tent and lays them out on the snow in the shape of a large cross. This was a prearranged visual signal to the expedition members who were watching through telescopes miles below at base camp.
So they could see it from the bottom.
The cross meant, no trace can be found, given up hope. The 1924 expedition was over. Mallory and Irvine belonged to the mountain.
The moment the news hit London, they instantly became national martyrs. The country was devastated, but deeply proud. King George V himself attended a massive memorial service at St. Paul's Cathedral.
They were heroes.
They were elevated to the absolute pantheon of British heroes. But the mountain wasn't done with them. Everest is this dynamic environment, and over the next 100 years, the mountain slowly, teasingly spit out clues, turning future generations of mountaineers into forensic detectives.
It's the slow reveal of the century.
Let's fast forward to the first major clue in 1933.
9 years later, a new British expedition returns to the North Face. A climber named Percy Wynne Harris is pushing up the ridge, roughly 60 feet below the crest near the first step.
Okay.
He looks down at a sloping 30-degree slab of rock, and he sees a piece of wood sticking out of the snow. He retrieves it. It is a beautifully crafted ice axe, and it is definitively identified as Sandy Irvine's.
This instantly sparks a massive debate. Because, as any climber knows, you do not just drop your ice axe on Everest.
Never.
It is your primary tool for arresting a fall. It is your literal lifeline. So why was it there? Did one of them slip and Irvine dropped it in a panic? Did he lay it down on the rock slab so he could use both hands to manage the climbing rope and then couldn't reach it?
The 1933 expedition leader, Hugh Rutledge, analyzed the location. The rock slab is treacherous. He concluded that it was highly unlikely Irvine simply set it down and forgot it.
Right, you'd never just forget it.
Rutledge believed the ice axe marked the exact scene of a fatal accident, the point where a slip occurred that sent them plummeting down the North Face.
The start of the fall.
Yes. Then, just 3 years later, the mystery deepens significantly.
The secret letter of 1936. This is such a fascinating historical footnote.
It really is. A renowned British climber named Frank Smythe is resting down at base camp. He is scanning the vast expanse of the North Face with a high-powered mounted telescope. He is sweeping the deep gullies far below the ridgeline. Suddenly, he stalks. He writes a confidential letter to Edward Norton, the former leader, stating unequivocally that he has spotted a body.
through the telescope.
Yes. He notes that the object is in the direct fall line directly below where Irvine's ice axe was found.
But he doesn't announce it to the world. Why? Why keep that a secret?
He vows in the letter not to tell the press, fearing it would ignite a morbid media circus and cause an unpleasant sensation for the families back in England.
You wanted to protect them.
He wanted to preserve the romance of the legend. That letter was filed away and remained hidden in archives for decades.
So the mountain stays quiet for a long time. Then we jump to 1975. A massive Chinese expedition is on the mountain, and they are the ones who famously bolt the aluminum ladder to the second step.
The Chinese ladder, yeah.
During that expedition, a Chinese climber named Wang Hongbao tells a Japanese climber a secret. He says he ventured off the road at 8,100 meters and stumbled upon the body of an English dead.
That phrasing is chilling.
The clothing, he noted, was ancient and disintegrated when touched.
The Chinese authorities officially suppressed the story, but the rumor leaked out into the global climbing community anyway.
Of course it did.
And it was this specific, tantalizing rumor, an English dead at 8,100 meters, that provided the geographical coordinates for the modern search expeditions. This directly culminated in the famous 1999 Mallory and Irvine research expedition led by the American mountaineer Eric Simonson.
The 1999 expedition changed everything. They deploy a team of elite climbers to systematically sweep the steep scree terraces at 8,100 meters, looking for Wang Hongbao's English dead.
And they are assuming it is Irvine.
Exactly. Conrad Anker is traversing the slope, and he sees a patch of white that is brighter than the surrounding snow.
Yeah.
It's alabaster skin. At 8,156 meters, resting face down on the freezing rocks, perfectly preserved by the extreme cold and dry air, they discover the body of George Mallory.
The excavation of the body was conducted with immense reverence, but it also functioned as a high-altitude forensic autopsy.
The ultimate crime scene investigation.
The physical trauma on Mallory's body told a grim, violently abrupt story of their final moments.
Let's break down the forensic evidence. What did the injuries tell them about the fall?
First, they found severe, deep rope jerk mottling and bruising around his torso.
Okay, meaning?
This definitively proved that he and Irvine were still roped together when the accident happened. The rope had ultimately snapped under the immense dynamic load of the fall.
That's terrifying.
He also had a catastrophic compound fracture in his right leg, but his left leg, which was unbroken, was deliberately crossed over the broken right leg.
Wait, deliberately crossed?
Yes. This is a recognized natural defensive posture. It indicates that he did not die instantly in the initial fall. He survived long enough to try and alleviate the agonizing pain of the broken bone.
But the fatal blow was to the head, right?
Yes. They found a golf ball-sized puncture wound in his forehead, just above the eye. The medical consensus is that as he was sliding down the scree slope, his head struck a jagged rock protruding from the ice.
Lights out.
The impact would have rendered him unconscious instantly, and death would have followed rapidly.
The physical injuries paint a picture of the fall, but it's the artifacts they found, and more importantly, the artifacts they didn't find, that fuel the summit debate to this day.
The clues are fascinating.
They found his altimeter, a tin of meat lozenges, and letters carefully wrapped in a handkerchief. But let's talk about what was missing. First, there was no heavy oxygen equipment anywhere near his body.
Which logically suggests that they had exhausted their oxygen supply much higher up on the ridge and discarded the heavy steel cylinders to save weight for the descent.
Second, and this is a massive clue, his tinted snow goggles were not on his face.
Right.
They were found safely tucked deep inside his pocket.
This is a critical piece of forensic evidence. If they were descending during the bright daylight, the intense glare of the high-altitude sun reflecting off the snow would have made it absolutely mandatory to wear those goggles to prevent snow blindness, as Norton had suffered.
Exactly. You wouldn't take them off in the sun.
The fact that the goggles were in his pocket strongly implies, it almost proves, that the fatal fall occurred when they were descending in the dark, or near darkness, after the sun had set.
Then there is the deeply personal, romantic clue. Mallory always carried a photograph of his wife, Ruth.
Always.
Before he left England, he had explicitly promised her that he would carry her picture to the top of the world and leave it on the summit of Mount Everest.
Yeah.
When the team painstakingly searched his clothing in 1999, the photograph of Ruth was missing.
It is the detail that makes people want to believe. Did he reach the top, pull the photo from his jacket, and leave it in the summit snows? Or was it simply blown away during the fall, or lost to the fierce winds over 75 years of exposure? We simply cannot know, because the one artifact that could definitively end the debate, His vest pocket Kodak camera, which John Knoll had taught him how to use, was nowhere to be found on his remains.
Which brings us full circle, sweeping right back to our opening hook.
The 2024 discovery.
September 2024. The National Geographic documentary team, led by Jimmy Chin, is exploring the central Rongbuk Glacier. The glacier is melting at an unprecedented rate due to climate change, exposing deep layers of ice.
Right.
They initially find an oxygen bottle dated 1933. Chin theorizes that the glacier acts like a conveyor belt. If heavy items fall off the sheer north face, they act like missiles, bouncing down the gullies and eventually get swallowed by the glacier, which slowly grinds its way downhill over decades.
A slow-moving river of ice.
They follow the folds of the ice and they find it. Irvine's boot. The foot still inside, the wool sock, and the red name tape. A.C. Irvine.
The geographical location of Irvine's remains adds a totally fascinating layer to the forensic reconstruction. They discovered his boot on the central Rongbuk Glacier, which is located a staggering 7,000 vertical feet below the scree terrace where Mallory's body was discovered in 1999.
I need you to explain the physics of that. We know from the rope bruising on Mallory that they were tied together when they fell.
Right.
How on earth do two men, roped together, end up 7,000 feet apart?
You have to visualize the topography of the North Face. It is not a flat slope. It is a complex, steep face, intersected by deep, almost vertical gullies and couloirs.
Okay, so it's uneven.
Very. When the initial slip occurred, perhaps near the ice axe site, they fell together. The ropes snapped under the strain. At that point, their trajectories diverged.
Oh, I see.
A human body falling on hard, steep ice accelerates rapidly. Mallory's fall was arrested by the relatively flatter scree terrace at 8,156 meters, but if Irvine slid slightly to the side into one of the steep, frictionless couloirs, there would be nothing to stop him.
He would just keep going.
He could have plummeted thousands of feet directly down to the glacier basin. Furthermore, over the course of a century, the glacier itself is a moving river of ice. It slowly transports debris downward.
So the fall plus the glacier movement.
Exactly. So the initial fall, compounded by a century of glacial movement, accounts for the massive separation. But the heartbreaking reality is that even with the monumental discovery of Irvine's remains, the Kodak camera is still missing.
So we have assembled the puzzle pieces. We have the forensic clues from the bodies, we have Odell's timeline, and we know the brutal terrain. We are just missing the camera.
The final proof.
So, it's time to render a verdict. Did George Mallory and Sandy Irvine make the first ascent of Mount Everest in 1924?
The big question.
Let's aggressively look at the science and the modern recreations. For decades, a major argument against their success was their gear. People looked at photos of them in tweed jackets and leather boots and said, there is no physical way that clothing could survive the summit.
That was the prevailing wisdom, but modern science has actually totally debunked it.
Really?
A team of researchers, led by Graham Hoyland, working with the textiles department at Loughborough University, decided to test this empirically.
Okay, what did they do?
They created exact fiber-for-fiber replicas of Mallory's 1924 clothing, the gabardine, the silk, the wool, the tweed. They put a mountaineer in an extreme environmental weather chamber and blasted him with freezing temperatures and wind.
And the results shocked everyone.
Completely. The 1920s gear utilized the principle of layering natural fibers to trap warm air close to the body, much like modern synthetic layering systems.
Right, layering is key.
The researchers found that the clothing was surprisingly effective and provided adequate insulation down to minus 30 degrees Celsius, provided one crucial condition was met. The climber had to keep moving.
So they couldn't just stand around.
The muscular exertion generated the heat that the clothing trapped. However, the study came with a fatal caveat. If the jet stream winds picked up significantly, penetrating the layers, or if the climbers were forced to stop moving and bivouac overnight without a tent, the clothing would fail catastrophically. It would freeze to death in a matter of hours.
So the science tells us they possess the physical capability to survive the cold as long as they were actively climbing. But what about the terrain? This brings us back to the ultimate roadblock, the second step.
The 30-meter rock cliff.
Right, culminating in a 5-meter vertical head wall situated at 28,000 feet. We established earlier that Mallory was climbing 5.9 and 5.1 Auto A routes in Wales.
Right. He had the skills.
He had the technical skill at sea level. Could he physically climb a 5.9 rock face up in the death zone without the modern aluminum ladder that everyone uses today?
To definitively answer that, the renowned American mountaineer Conrad Anker, who poetically is the exact same man who found Mallory's body in 1999, returned to the North Ridge of Everest in 2007.
Okay, what was his mission?
Anchor actually removed the Chinese ladder from the second step to see if the rock could be free-climbed using the natural holds that Mallory would have faced.
Wow, that's bold.
Anchor, using modern climbing techniques, successfully free-climbed the step. He formally graded the difficulty of the head wall at a 5.9.
Which places it firmly within Mallory's proven historical physical capabilities. He climbed 5.9s in Wales. Anchor proved the step is a 5.9. That sounds like a definitive yes.
It is a theoretical yes, but it requires intense contact. Anchor proved the physical rock can be climbed, but we have to debate the realities of doing it in 1924. Conrad Anchor is an elite modern climber. He was wearing specialized sticky rubber climbing shoes. He knew the route was possible. He had modern, lightweight, reliable oxygen gear.
All the advantages.
Now contrast that with Mallory. Mallory arrived at the base of the second step exhausted. He was wearing stiff leather boots with heavy steel hobnails, which are excellent for gripping ice, but are notoriously terrible, like wearing ice skates on smooth vertical rock.
Oh, man.
He was carrying a cumbersome 30-pound oxygen frame on his back that restricted his movement, and most importantly, he didn't know if the rock was even climbable. Overcoming those compounding factors makes a 5.9 at 28,000 feet an almost insurmountable task.
Which finally brings us to the most damning piece of evidence against the summit theory. The brutal mathematics of the timeline.
The timeline is the killer.
The physical distance from their Camp 6 to the summit is incredibly long. Odell spotted them at 12:50 p.m. We know they were already 5 hours behind Mallory's own written schedule. To put this in modern perspective, today, climbers with fixed ropes, lightweight gear, and a clear path leave their high camp around midnight. They wear headlamps so they can climb in the dark, summit by mid-morning, and ensure they have enough daylight to navigate the treacherous descent. Mallory and Irvine left in the morning, and they possessed no headlamps.
When you synthesize all the physiological data, the forensics, the terrain analysis, and the meteorological records, the timeline is the single most insurmountable factor against a successful summit.
There just isn't enough time.
If they were at the second step at 12:50 p.m., the summit was still at least 3 hours away, assuming a perfect climb. That puts them on the summit at 4 p.m. The sun sets shortly after. They would be descending the most dangerous ridge on Earth in total darkness.
So putting all the pieces of the puzzle together, what is the most scientifically and historically sound explanation of what happened to them on June 8, 1924?
The prevailing consensus, supported by climbers like Conrad Anchor, who have intimately studied the terrain and the bodies, is that Odell's sighting was misidentified due to the distance and the mists. Okay.
When Odell saw them surmount a rock step at 12:50 p.m., they were likely cresting the first step, not the second.
Because the first step takes 5 minutes to scramble over, which matches Odell's description perfectly.
Exactly. They scramble up the first step. They stand on the ridge. They look ahead at the daunting, sheer prow of the second step. Mallory, despite his romanticism, is an experienced alpinist. He does the math.
He knows it's too late.
He realizes his oxygen is running low, the weather is turning, and they are hopelessly out of time. He makes the agonizing, heartbreaking decision to turn back, choosing survival over the summit.
And then the descent begins. It is late afternoon, pushing into the early evening. The light is fading, which perfectly explains why Mallory takes off his tinted snow goggles and puts them in his pocket.
Exactly.
They are exhausted, stumbling down the ridge in the encroaching darkness. And then the fatal mistake. One of them, perhaps Irvine, slipping on the rock slab where his axe was found, loses his footing.
It just takes one slip. The rope jerks violently, pulling the other off balance. They slide down the steep face. The static rope, unable to handle the dynamic shock, snaps. Mallory plummets, striking his head on a rock, and comes to rest on the scree terrace.
And Irvine
continues to fall, tumbling into a steep couloir, eventually coming to rest thousands of feet below on the glacier, where his boot would melt out of the ice exactly 100 years later.
It is a tragic scenario, but it is the most logically sound explanation that perfectly aligns with every single piece of forensic evidence, the meteorological data, and the brutal realities of high-altitude mountaineering.
It is the most logical answer, but the missing camera and the missing photograph of Ruth ensure that the 1% sliver of doubt will endure. As we wrap up this deep dive, it's worth noting the massive cultural shockwave this 1924 expedition sent through the world.
Oh, the cultural impact was huge.
The expedition filmmaker John Knoll released his footage as a movie called The Epic of Everest, but to promote it in London, he made a colossal diplomatic blunder.
The dancing llamas.
Yes. He secretly brought a group of Tibetan monks to England to perform religious dances before the film screenings. This became known as the Affair of the Dancing Lamas. It deeply offended the Dalai Lama and the Tibetan authorities, who viewed it as a gross mockery of their religion.
Unbelievable.
In retaliation, Tibet slammed the door shut, barring all Everest expeditions for the next 9 years.
It underscores how fragile the access to the mountain was. But regardless of the diplomatic fallout, the sheer ambition of the 1924 expedition remains truly staggering.
It really does.
These men were venturing into the literal unknown, pushing the absolute boundaries of human physiology with technology that was barely out of the prototype phase. Even if Mallory and Irvine failed to reach the summit, their expedition laid the essential groundwork.
They paved the way.
They proved, unequivocally, the necessity of bottled oxygen. They highlighted the vital, irreplaceable role of the Sherpa climbers. The lessons learned in the blood and ice of 1924 were the exact tools that eventually allowed Hillary and Tenzing to succeed 3 decades later.
It's a profound testament to the outer limits of human endurance and the relentless drive to explore. And it leaves you, the listener, with the deeply philosophical question to mull over as we sign off.
I like this one.
In mountaineering, reaching the summit is only half the journey. The other half is surviving the descent. Let's play a hypothetical game here.
Okay.
Let's say, against all odds, a glaciologist goes back up the Rongbuk Glacier next year. They follow the debris field up from Irvine's boot, and they find the Vest Pocket Kodak camera.
The Holy Grail.
They managed to develop the century-old film, and there it is, a crystal-clear photograph of George Mallory and Sandy Irvine standing triumphantly on the summit of Mount Everest. Does it count?
That is the question.
Does it count as the first ascent if they never made it back down to tell the tale? What defines a true victory over nature? We started today with the visceral image of a boot melting out of the ice, a jagged, brutal reminder that the mountain always keeps the score. Is the peak truly conquered if the mountain claims you on the way down? We will leave you to think about that. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.